Daniel Brooks drove through the rain with both hands tight on the wheel, his eyes burning from back-to-back shifts, and his mind heavy with the custody hearing that waited only 3 days ahead. The wipers beat a steady rhythm against the downpour, but nothing could clear the fog inside him. Then he saw them standing in the darkness, 2 white girls beside a dead luxury sedan, soaked and stranded on the shoulder of the empty highway. Another car slowed down. The driver looked directly at Daniel, and then sped away without stopping. He thought of his daughter Naomi, alone somewhere in the dark and the rain. He took a deep breath and pulled over. The rain hit him the moment he stepped out of his car, cold and relentless, soaking through his thin work jacket before he had made it even 10 steps toward them. The 2 girls watched him approach with a wariness he recognized instantly, the slight step backward, the way the taller one positioned herself protectively in front of her younger sister. He had seen that particular look before, directed at him in grocery stores, on sidewalks late at night, in the eyes of strangers who had already decided exactly who he was before he ever spoke a single word. Daniel stopped at a respectful distance and held up both hands, palms facing outward. "I'm not trying to scare you," he said, raising his voice above the steady drumming of the rain. "I just saw you stranded out here. Thought maybe I could help." The taller girl, Emily, though he did not know her name, yet studied him for a long and careful moment. Her blonde hair was plastered flat against her face, mascara running in dark streaks down her pale cheeks. "Our car just died," she said finally. "We've been standing here for over an hour." No one stopped. Her sister Olivia stood slightly behind her, thin arms wrapped tightly around herself, shivering violently in the cold rain. She could not have been more than 16 years old, and the fear visible in her eyes was mixed with something else, exhaustion, maybe, or the particular kind of disappointment that comes from learning at a young age exactly how the world actually works. Daniel walked past them to the Mercedes, its hazard lights still blinking weakly in the darkness. He tried the ignition and heard nothing but a dead click. He popped the hood and checked the battery terminals, but he already knew what he would find. "Battery's completely gone," he said. "Not something I can fix out here on the side of the road. You're going to need a tow truck." "We already tried calling," Emily said. "The tow company said it would be 2 hours minimum before anyone could get here. And our dad," she stopped herself abruptly and glanced over at her sister. "Our dad's not answering his phone," Olivia finished quietly. A police cruiser rolled past on the highway, slowing down just enough for Daniel to see the officer's face turn toward them through the rain-streaked window. He felt that familiar tension building in his chest, the automatic calculation of how he must look right now. A black man, standing alone in the dark with 2 young white women on a deserted stretch of highway. But the cruiser did not stop. The officer looked at them, seemed to assess the situation, and then simply drove on into the night. Daniel stood in the pouring rain and carefully weighed his options. He could leave them here with a clear conscience, tell himself that this was not his problem, that he had enough troubles of his own without borrowing more from strangers. He thought about the custody hearing coming in just 3 days, about how any misunderstanding or false accusation could completely destroy the fragile case he had spent months building for keeping his daughter. He thought about all the many reasons a smart man would simply get back in his car and drive away. Then he thought about Naomi, his baby girl, standing alone somewhere in the rain like this, watching car after car pass by without stopping to help her. "There's a hotel about 10 minutes from here," he said. "The Hampton Inn just off Route 9. I can take you there if you want. You can wait for your tow truck somewhere dry and warm. Call someone to come pick you up." He paused, knowing full well how the offer might sound coming from him. "I know you don't know me. I'm just a guy who saw you needed help, but it's going to be a cold few hours if you stay out here waiting." Emily and Olivia exchanged a long look, the kind of silent communication that only sisters share after years of growing up together. Daniel could see the calculation happening behind their eyes, the careful risk assessment that women learn to make every single day of their lives. He waited patiently, making no move toward them, giving them all the space they needed to make their own decision. "Okay," Emily said finally. "Okay, thank you." They walked together to his car, and Daniel opened the back door for them. noting how they both slid in together and stayed pressed close to each other. He got behind the wheel and pulled back onto the dark highway, the heater working overtime against the chill they had brought in with them. For the first several minutes, no one spoke a word. The only sounds were the rain beating against the windshield, the steady rhythm of the wipers, and the heavy silence of strangers trying to decide whether they could trust each other. The heat from the vents slowly filled the small car, and Daniel watched in the rearview mirror as the two girls gradually stopped shivering. Their shoulders relaxed little by little, though they still sat pressed together in the back seat like they were bracing themselves for something bad to happen. Olivia kept glancing at the door handle every few seconds, and Daniel pretended not to notice. "I'm Daniel," he said, keeping his voice casual and unthreatening. "Daniel Brooks. Emily," the older one said after a brief pause. "This is my sister Olivia. Nice to meet you both. Wish it was under better circumstances than this." The silence returned, but it felt different now, less like fear and more like simple uncertainty. Daniel kept his focus on the road ahead, giving them time to settle. He had learned long ago that trust could never be demanded from people. It had to be earned slowly, in small increments, in the quiet spaces between words. "Do you live around here?" Emily asked finally. "About 20 minutes east. Place called Garfield Heights." He did not add that Garfield Heights was exactly the kind of neighborhood that people like them probably locked their doors driving through. "What about you two?" "Westbrook Hills," Olivia said, then immediately looked at her sister like she had revealed too much to a stranger. Daniel just nodded. Westbrook Hills. He knew that name. Old money, big houses with perfect lawns, the kind of neighborhood where everything looked like a golf course, and the police actually showed up quickly when you called them. A completely different world from the cramped two-bedroom apartment where he was raising Naomi all by himself. "Long way from home," he said simply. "We were at a concert," Emily explained. "The venue's about an hour north of here. We were supposed to be back home by 11, but then the car she made a dying sound with her mouth, almost turning it into a joke. And Daniel caught the first glimpse of a real person hiding beneath all that fear. That's a bad stretch of road to break down on," he said. "Not much of anything out here at night. We noticed." Olivia's voice had a bitter edge to it now. 3 cars passed right by us without stopping. One guy actually pulled over, looked at us standing there, and then just drove away. 4 cars. Emily corrected her quietly. "You didn't see the first one." Daniel thought about the police cruiser, the way the officer had looked at them and just kept moving. He thought about all the different reasons someone might not stop for 2 young women alone on a dark highway, and he thought about all the different reasons someone might not stop when they saw a black man standing there with them. "People get scared," he said finally. "Doesn't make it right. But fear makes people do things they wouldn't normally do." "Were you scared?" Olivia asked him directly. "To stop for us?" Daniel considered the question honestly before answering. "A little," he admitted. "Stopping for 2 strangers in the middle of the night on an empty highway, there's always some risk involved in that. But I've got a daughter of my own. She's 6 years old. I kept thinking about what I'd want someone to do if she was ever stranded somewhere alone like this." The words seemed to settle in the car like something tangible and real. Emily leaned forward slightly, her voice noticeably softer now. "You have a daughter? Naomi." Just saying her name out loud made something warm bloom in his chest. "She's my whole world. Everything I do is for her. Is she with her mom tonight?" And there it was, the crack in the dam. The place where his own story started bleeding through into theirs. Daniel gripped the steering wheel a little tighter and chose his next words very carefully. "She's staying with a neighbor I trust. Her mom and I aren't together anymore. There's a custody hearing coming up in just a few days." "Oh." Emily's voice changed, carrying a weight that seemed much older than her years. "That must be really hard." "It is." Daniel glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "They're saying I'm not stable enough, that I can't provide for her properly. I work 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. But apparently that's still not enough for some people who get to decide these things. He had not meant to say that much. The words had just slipped out, loosened by exhaustion and the strange intimacy of the dark car and the rain. But Emily was nodding slowly, like she understood something she had not expected to. "People decide who you are before you even speak," she said quietly. "They look at you, and they think they already know the whole story." Daniel's hands went still on the wheel. The words hit him somewhere very deep, in the place where he carried every suspicious look, every clutched purse, every time someone had crossed the street just to avoid walking past him. Here was this girl from wealthy Westbrook Hills, this white teenager from a world of privilege he would never know, and she had just named the exact weight he carried every single day of his life. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yeah, they do." The hotel sign glowed in the distance ahead, and Daniel realized he was almost sorry the drive was ending so soon. For just a few minutes, in the warmth of this car with the rain falling outside, something had shifted between them. Two strangers had started to become something else entirely, not friends exactly, but witnesses to each other's humanity. He pulled into the hotel parking lot and stopped the car near the entrance. "Here you go. They've got a lobby where you can wait safely. Should be warm and dry in there." Emily reached for the door handle, then paused. "Thank you," she said, and the words carried far more weight than that simple phrase usually held. "Really? Thank you. Get home safe," Daniel told her. "Both of you." He watched them walk inside through the rain, watched the warm lights of the hotel lobby swallow them up, and then he pulled back onto the highway toward home. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle now, and the rhythm of the wipers seemed quieter, almost peaceful. He thought about Naomi waiting for him, about the hearing in 3 days, about everything that could still go wrong. But underneath all that worry, something else was stirring, a small, stubborn hope that maybe kindness still meant something in a world that often seemed determined to prove otherwise. The apartment was dark when Daniel finally parked outside, but a single lamp glowed in the living room window. Mrs. Patterson from next door would have left it on for him, her small gesture of care that she never made a big deal about. He climbed the stairs slowly, his legs heavy from the double shift, and unlocked the door as quietly as he possibly could. Naomi was curled up on the couch, a worn blanket pulled up to her chin, her small body rising and falling with the steady rhythm of sleep. She had tried to wait up for him. He could see the picture book still clutched in her small hands, her shoes still on her feet, like she had been ready to run to the door the moment she heard his key in the lock. Mrs. Patterson had left a note on the kitchen counter. She wouldn't go to bed, said she had to see you first. Daniel stood there for a long moment, just watching his daughter breathe. She was so small, so impossibly small, and yet she carried herself with a seriousness that broke his heart sometimes. Only 6 years old and already learning that the world was not always kind, that promises sometimes got broken, that the people who were supposed to protect you could disappear without any warning at all. He crossed the room and knelt beside the couch, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her eyes fluttered open, still heavy with sleep, and when she saw him standing there, her whole body relaxed in a way that made his chest ache with love. "Daddy," she whispered. "Hey, baby girl, I'm home." She sat up slowly, the blanket falling away, and looked at him with those dark eyes that always saw too much for someone so young. "Are they going to take me away?" The question hit him like a physical blow to the chest. He had tried so hard to protect her from the details of the custody battle, to keep all his fear and anger carefully hidden away from her. But children absorbed more than adults ever gave them credit for. She had heard the phone calls when he thought she was asleep. She had seen the official letters arriving in the mail. She had felt the tension that filled their small apartment, like invisible smoke. "No, baby." Daniel kept his voice steady through sheer force of will. "No one's taking you anywhere. You're staying right here with me. Promise?" He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "I promise," he said, and he meant it with every single fiber of his being. even as a small voice in the back of his mind whispered that some promises were much easier to make than they were to keep. After she had finally fallen back asleep in her own bed, Daniel sat alone at the kitchen table with the court documents spread out before him. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the legal language that had become his nightly reading. Petitioner claims respondent lacks stable employment. Concerns regarding living conditions. Questions about respondent's ability to provide appropriate care for minor child. Each phrase was a knife, precise and cold, designed to reduce him to nothing more than a collection of deficiencies and failures. They did not mention the bedtime stories he read to her every night without fail. They did not mention the lunches he packed with care every morning. They did not mention the way he walked Naomi to school every single day, even when he had worked the night shift and had not slept at all. They did not mention love, because love was not a legal category that could be measured and evaluated and put into a court file. Heather had remarried a man named David with a nice house in the suburbs and a steady job with good benefits. On paper, they looked like the obviously better option. 2 incomes, a big backyard, a safe neighborhood with good schools. The court would see stability, security, all the things that Daniel could not offer no matter how hard he worked. But Naomi did not want stability. She wanted him. She had told him so in the simple, devastating way that children speak the truth. "I want to stay with you, Daddy. You're my home." Daniel stared at the documents until the words blurred together, until the kitchen light seemed too bright and the silence seemed too loud. 3 days. He had just 3 days to convince a judge that he was worthy of keeping his own daughter, that his love outweighed his poverty, that his character mattered more than his circumstances. 3 days to fight a system that had already decided who he was before he ever walked into the courtroom. He thought about Emily's words in the car, "People decide who you are before you speak," and he wondered if that judge had already made up his mind too. The courthouse in downtown Cleveland stood like a monument to authority and power. All marble columns and heavy wooden doors that seemed specifically designed to make ordinary people feel small and insignificant. Daniel had worn his only suit, the one he saved for funerals and job interviews, and it hung slightly loose on his frame from all the weight he had lost over months of constant stress. He had polished his shoes until they shone and rehearsed his answers until they felt almost natural in his mouth. But walking up those imposing steps, he still felt like a man on trial for a crime he had not committed. The waiting area outside the family courtroom was lined with uncomfortable plastic chairs and harsh fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly sick and tired. Other families sat in tense clusters throughout the room. Mothers clutching thick folders of documents. Fathers staring blankly at their phones. Children too young to understand why they were there at all. Daniel found a seat near the window and tried to slow his rapid breathing. His lawyer, a public defender named Marcus Thompson, who had taken his case pro bono, sat down beside him with a reassuring nod. Marcus was a good man who truly believed in what he did, but Daniel knew the statistics all too well. He knew how often fathers lost these custody battles, how often black fathers specifically watched helplessly as their children walked away with someone else. The system was simply not built for men like him. When the courtroom doors finally opened, Daniel stood on legs that felt uncertain beneath him. The room itself was smaller than he had expected, wood-paneled and formal, with an American flag standing in the corner like a silent witness. He took his seat at the respondent's table and focused all his energy on keeping his hands still in his lap. Heather entered from the other side of the room, and seeing her still felt like a wound that had not fully healed. She had been his wife once, the mother of his child, the woman he had thought he would grow old with. Now she sat at the opposite table with her new husband, David, and a lawyer whose expensive suit probably cost more than Daniel made in an entire month. Paul Whitman was the lawyer's name, sleek and confident, the kind of man who had never once worried about a court deciding his fundamental worth as a human being. And then the bailiff called the room to order, and the door behind the bench opened, and Judge Richard Carter walked in. Daniel's heart stopped completely in his chest. He knew that face. He knew those eyes, the same blue eyes he had seen in the rearview mirror just 3 nights ago, looking back at him from 2 teenage girls sitting in his back seat. Emily and Olivia Carter. Carter. The name had not meant anything to him then, just another pair of strangers stranded in the rain. But now, the judge settled into his chair with the practiced ease of a man who had done this exact thing 1,000 times before. He opened the file before him, adjusting his reading glasses, and Daniel watched his face intently for any sign of recognition. For a long moment, there was nothing at all. Just the routine movements of a man beginning another ordinary day's work. Then, Judge Carter looked up from the file. His eyes moved slowly across the courtroom, pausing briefly on each party in turn, and when they finally reached Daniel, something shifted in his expression. A flicker of surprise, quickly controlled, a slight tension visible around his jaw. He looked back down at the file, turned a page, and looked up again, this time with an intensity that made Daniel's breath catch in his throat. The silence stretched out. 3 seconds, 4, 5. "We will take a brief recess," Judge Carter said abruptly. 15 minutes. The bailiff looked confused. "Your Honor, the hearing was just called to order. 15 minutes. The judge's voice left absolutely no room for argument. He stood, gathered the file, and disappeared through the door behind the bench. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Marcus leaned close to Daniel and whispered urgently, "Do you have any idea what that was about?" Daniel could not answer. He could only stare at the closed door, his mind racing through possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. The judge knew. The judge had recognized him, but what did that actually mean for his case? Would he recuse himself? Would he be grateful for what Daniel had done for his daughters that night? Or would he see the situation differently, a black man alone with 2 white teenage girls on a dark and empty highway, and draw his own damning conclusions? The minutes crawled by like hours. Daniel sat motionless in his chair, acutely aware of Heather and her lawyer whispering urgently across the aisle. Aware of the bailiff's curious glances in his direction, aware of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. When the door finally opened again, it was not the judge who emerged, it was a court clerk, who walked directly over to Daniel and leaned down to speak quietly. "Judge Carter would like to see you in his chambers. Please follow me." Marcus started to stand, but the clerk shook her head firmly. "Just Mr. Brooks." Daniel rose on unsteady legs and followed the clerk down a narrow hallway to a heavy oak door. The clerk knocked once, opened it, and stepped aside to let him enter. Judge Richard Carter sat behind a large desk covered in files and law books, but he was not looking at any of them. He was looking directly at Daniel with an expression that seemed to hold a dozen different emotions all at once: recognition, gratitude, uncertainty, and something deeper that Daniel could not quite name. "Please," the judge said, gesturing to a leather chair across from him. Daniel sat. The leather creaked beneath him, and he realized that his palms were sweating. Everything Naomi, the hearing, his entire future as a father hung on whatever was about to happen in the next few minutes. "My daughters told me about you," Judge Carter began. His voice was completely different here, stripped of all the formal authority it carried in the courtroom. Quieter. More human. "They told me everything. How no one else stopped for them that night. How you did. How you drove them to safety when you had every reason in the world not to." Daniel said nothing. He was not sure what there was to say. "Do you know how many cars passed them that night?" The judge leaned forward slightly. 7. 7 cars slowed down, looked at 2 teenage girls stranded in a storm, and kept driving. But you stopped. A complete stranger with no obligation to help, who could have kept going with a perfectly clear conscience. You stopped. "I have a daughter," Daniel said finally. "I thought about what I'd want someone to do for her." The judge studied him for a long moment. "I've been on this bench for 18 years. I've seen thousands of cases, read thousands of files. After a while, you start to think you can read people. that you can look at a document and know exactly what kind of person you're dealing with. He paused. Your file made me think I knew you. A man with unstable employment, a modest income, a small apartment in a tough neighborhood. I looked at those facts and I thought I understood the situation completely. Daniel felt something cold move through him. And what do you understand now? That I was looking at the wrong things entirely. Judge Carter removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose wearily. My daughters told me how you talked to them, how you gave them space to feel safe, how you spoke about your daughter Naomi like she was the absolute center of your universe. He met Daniel's eyes directly. They said they felt safer with you than they had all night. The words settled into Daniel's chest. Warm and unexpected. He had spent so long being told he was not enough by Heather, by the court system, by a world that looked at him and saw statistics instead of a person. To hear that he had made two strangers feel safe, that his simple kindness had actually mattered to someone, it was almost too much to process. There's something else, Judge Carter continued. His voice had gone careful now, measured. When I looked at your case file more closely, really looked at it, I found some things that concerned me. Not about you. He paused significantly. About the petitioner's submissions. Daniel's heart began to beat faster. What do you mean? There are inconsistencies. Financial records that don't add up. Employment history that seems fabricated in places. I've requested additional documentation from Mrs. Brooks's attorney, and I've ordered an independent investigation. The judge folded his hands on the desk. I can't discuss the details with you directly, but I want you to understand that this court is going to look at the full picture, not just the version that's been presented. For a moment, Daniel could not speak. He had known that Heather's case was not entirely honest. He had felt it in his gut, the way certain claims did not match the reality he remembered. But he had assumed the court would never look closely enough to see the cracks. Courts favored mothers. Courts favored stability. Courts favored the version of the story that was easiest to believe. I need to ask you something directly, Judge Carter said, and I need you to answer honestly, because it matters. Okay. Have you ever done anything at all that would make you a danger to your daughter? Any history of violence, substance abuse, criminal behavior, anything that, if it came to light, would change how this case should be decided? Daniel met the judge's eyes without flinching. No. I've made mistakes. I've fallen short in ways that keep me up at night. But I have never done anything to hurt my daughter. And I never would. She's the only thing I'm sure about in this world. The silence that followed felt like a test. Judge Carter studied his face, looking for something doubt, perhaps, or deception. Whatever he found there seemed to satisfy him, because after a long moment, he nodded slowly. Then we're going to get this right, he said. Whatever that means. When they returned to the courtroom, Daniel could feel the weight of every single eye on him. Heather's lawyer was whispering furiously in her ear, and even Marcus looked uncertain, unsure what had happened in the judge's chambers. Daniel took his seat and tried to quiet the storm raging inside him. The hearing resumed with a different energy in the room. Paul Whitman seemed to sense that something had shifted, and he came out swinging hard. He questioned Daniel's work history, lingering on every gap in employment. He raised concerns about the neighborhood, describing Garfield Heights in terms that made it sound like a war zone. He painted a picture of instability and inadequacy. Mr. Brooks, Whitman said, pacing slowly before him. You work 2 jobs, is that correct? And these jobs, one is a night shift at a warehouse, and the other is weekend maintenance work? That's right, which means you're away from your daughter during most of her waking hours. Working. While she's home alone, she's with trusted caregivers when I'm working. Neighbors I've known for years. People who love her. Neighbors. Whitman made the word sound inadequate. Not family. Not professional childcare. Daniel kept his voice steady. Those people have watched out for Naomi since she was born. They're as much family as anyone. But then Judge Carter spoke. Mr. Whitman, I have some questions about documentation submitted by your client. The employment records show consistent income from a marketing firm for 3 years, but I've received information suggesting those records may be incomplete. Can you explain why there's no record of Mrs. Brooks's termination 8 months ago? The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Daniel watched Heather's face go pale. Watched Paul Whitman's composure crack for just a moment before he recovered. I'll need to consult with my client about that discrepancy, Whitman managed. I think you should. The judge's voice was ice. I'm also troubled by financial statements that don't match bank records my office subpoenaed independently. What followed was a careful, methodical dismantling of the case Heather had built. The judge asked about employment gaps her lawyer had hidden, about debts that had not been disclosed, about the true nature of her current living situation. With each question, another piece of the facade crumbled, and Daniel watched as the woman he had once loved revealed herself to be someone he barely recognized anymore. By the time Judge Carter was ready to deliver his ruling, the courtroom felt different. The weight of expectation had shifted, and even Whitman seemed to know that the ground had moved beneath him. I've heard arguments from both parties, Judge Carter finally began. I've reviewed evidence submitted, and I've conducted my own investigation into claims made by each side. This court's primary concern is the welfare of the child, Naomi Brooks. Everything else is secondary to that. His eyes found Daniel's across the room. What I've found is that Mr. Brooks, despite significant financial challenges, has provided consistent, loving care for his daughter. His work schedule is demanding, but he has made arrangements that prioritize her safety and well-being. His neighbors speak highly of him. His daughter, in interviews conducted by court-appointed evaluators, has expressed a clear and consistent desire to remain in his care. Daniel felt his breath catch. He had not known about those interviews, had not known that Naomi's voice had been heard somewhere in this process. On the other hand, the petitioner's case has been built on a foundation that I now find questionable. Financial misrepresentations, employment inconsistencies, and evidence that suggests the motivation here may not be entirely about what's best for the child. The judge's voice hardened. This court does not look kindly on attempts to manipulate the legal process. He straightened the papers before him with a sense of finality. It is the ruling of this court that full custody of Naomi Brooks be granted to the respondent, Daniel Brooks. The petitioner will be granted supervised visitation rights, pending a review in 6 months. This case is closed. The gavel fell, and the sound echoed through the room like thunder. For a long moment, Daniel could not move. He sat frozen in his chair, the words still sinking in, the reality too large to hold all at once. Then, Marcus was gripping his shoulder, saying something about congratulations. And across the aisle, Heather was crying silently, while her lawyer gathered his things with barely concealed frustration. Daniel stood slowly. His legs felt weak, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He had prepared himself for loss, had steeled himself against the worst. He had not let himself hope, because hope was too dangerous when everything you loved was on the line. But now Naomi was his. Officially, legally, permanently his. No one could take her away. No one could decide he was not enough. He had fought the system and won, not with money or power, but with the simple, stubborn insistence that love should count for something. He walked out of that courtroom into the bright afternoon light, and for the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe. The bus ride home felt different than any bus ride Daniel had ever taken. The same streets passed outside the window. The same potholes jolted the frame. But everything had changed. He kept turning the words over in his mind, full custody, testing their weight, their reality. By the time he climbed the stairs to his apartment, his hands were shaking so hard he almost could not get the key in the lock. Mrs. Patterson opened her door before he could knock, Naomi already at her side. The little girl's eyes went wide when she saw her father's face, searching for the answer to the question she had not dared to ask out loud. Daniel knelt down, his knees hitting the worn carpet, and he opened his arms. "You're staying with me," he said. His voice cracked on the words, but he did not try to hide it. "Forever. No one's ever taking you away." Naomi flew into his arms so hard it almost knocked him over. She did not cry, she was too overwhelmed for tears, but her small hands gripped his jacket with a fierceness that said everything words could not. They stayed like that for a long time, father and daughter, holding on to each other in the doorway of their small apartment, while Mrs. Patterson wiped her eyes and pretended not to watch. Later, after Naomi had finally stopped asking if he was sure, if he was really sure, they sat together on the couch, eating macaroni and cheese from chipped bowls. The apartment was still small. The radiator still made strange noises. The view from the window was still the same parking lot it had always been. But none of that mattered now. "Daddy?" Naomi said, her voice small but steady. "Yeah, baby? Can we get a cat now?" Daniel laughed a real laugh, the first one in months, and pulled her close. "We'll see about a cat, but maybe we start with a goldfish." She considered this seriously. "Okay. But I'm naming it Princess Sparkle. Princess Sparkle it is." That night, after Naomi was asleep in her own bed with no fear of being taken away, Daniel sat by her door and listened to her breathe. The apartment was quiet except for the distant sounds of the city, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, the quiet felt peaceful instead of lonely. They were home. They were safe. They were together. And that was enough. The invitation arrived 3 weeks later, a cream-colored envelope with elegant handwriting that looked out of place in Daniel's mailbox. Inside was a dinner invitation from Judge Carter himself. Daniel's first instinct was to decline. The case was over, what more was there to say? But Naomi had been asking about the twins, and something in the judge's words had stayed with him. The Carter house was exactly what Daniel had imagined, a sprawling colonial on a manicured lawn. He helped Naomi out, straightening her dress collar. Her eyes were huge as she took in the fountain, the landscaping. "It's really big," she whispered. "Yeah," Daniel agreed. "It is." Emily opened the door with a genuine smile. "You came." She led them to a dining room set for 6. Judge Carter was waiting, looking different without his robes. Olivia sat beside him, along with the girl's grandmother. The awkwardness was almost physical, 2 worlds colliding. But Naomi broke the tension by asking Olivia about Princess Sparkle, the goldfish. "You have a goldfish named Princess Sparkle?" Olivia's face lit up. "That's amazing." Within 10 minutes, Naomi was chattering with the twins like old friends. "Thank you for coming," Judge Carter said quietly. "I've been thinking about the kind of father I've been, the kind of judge. I'm not proud of everything I see." He met Daniel's eyes. "My girls told me they'd been more scared of the world than they ever let me know. They said you were the first person who made them feel they could trust a stranger again." Daniel did not know how to respond. He had just done what seemed right. "I spent years thinking money meant stability. That night in the rain, you showed my daughters more about what a good man looks like than I have in years of giving them everything money could buy. You gave me a fair hearing," Daniel said. "That's more than a lot of people get. It shouldn't be remarkable." They talked through dinner, 2 fathers finding common ground. By dessert, something had shifted, not friendship exactly, but mutual respect. As they left, Emily caught his arm. "Thank you for everything." He drove home through streets that did not seem quite as dark. 6 months later, the apartment was still small, but there were photographs on the walls, Naomi at her school play, Princess Sparkle in her bowl. The fridge was covered in drawings. It looked like a home, because it was one. Daniel still worked 2 jobs. Money was still tight. But the fear was manageable now. He had proven that his love mattered, that the system could still recognize truth. The Carters stayed in touch. Emily and Olivia texted Naomi sometimes. Judge Carter had written a recommendation when Daniel applied for a better job. Small gestures that added up to something larger, recognition that kindness created ripples beyond their origin. Daniel thought sometimes about that rainy night, about the decision to pull over. He had done it without thinking. acting on the belief that you helped people who needed helping. He had not known what would come of it. Maybe kindness was about planting seeds you might never see grow, sending ripples across water you would never cross again. Naomi was 7 now, taller and bolder. She still said, "I love you, Daddy," every night. Every time, Daniel felt the weight of all the ways things could have gone differently. In this life, he had won. Not because he was rich or powerful, but because he had shown up. Because he had loved her fiercely. Because when it mattered, he had been exactly the father she needed. On a Saturday morning in early spring, Daniel took Naomi to the park. Trees were blooming. Children swarmed the playground. He watched her race to the swings, braids flying, laughter bright. An older woman sat beside him. She smiled warmly. "Beautiful day," she said. "It really is." Naomi waved from the slide. The world kept turning imperfect and full of quiet acts of kindness that never made the news. Daniel had learned something that night. The world was not divided into heroes and villains. Everyone was both, in different moments. The only thing that mattered was what you chose when the choice was yours. He chose kindness. He chose to stop. That choice had changed everything, not because kindness always came with rewards, but because it made him the kind of person he wanted to be. Naomi came running back, demanding ice cream. Daniel took her hand. "Maybe," he said. They walked toward the corner shop, shadows stretching long in spring sunshine. You could stop for strangers in the rain, and sometimes, against all odds, it mattered.